Hey there, good people of the world. Big Heavy back with an electrifying review of the Yoshino B660 SST. And I've got it set up here on the turntable. I'm going to do my classic walk around. We'll talk about every square inch of this device. But I wanted to start out with the three things that I think makes this a little bit different and potentially unique than your typical power bank. And I'll go from kind of the least controversial to, one of the more controversial, if you can speak of controversy with battery banks, features that this has that I think set it apart from the rest of the battery bank pack. So first off is design and materials. So this is one of the nicer battery banks in terms of materials. It's got good solid plastics. It's got this handle with this nice soft touch area below it. I think this handle's made of either a really good fake metallic plastic or some sort of aluminum or something like that. But it just feels nice in your hand. Somebody clearly picked one of these up a few hundred times and figured out that you needed a nice little cushioned area down there. It's got this sort of interesting green color to it. And it's right up there in terms of materials with something like an EcoFlow, which was my previous winner of kind of the highest quality materials race. I think this maybe has a little more of a, an Apple type feel versus the EcoFlow is a little bit more of a business type feel. If you remember those old I'm a Mac versus I'm a PC kind of ads.
Hello, I'm a Mac. And I'm a PC.
This would definitely be the Mac, and maybe EcoFlow is a little bit more of the PC in terms of design style. Now the second standout feature that I think is really interesting is I really dislike power bricks, especially in the context of having it with a power bank. I think it's, one more big thing to tote around if you're going to take these things camping or take them on some sort of, long-term car trip, road trip, any sort of adventure like that. And also if you buy one of these for disaster preparedness, if you've got that storm bearing down on you and you don't know where you left the stupid power brick and the thing's only got, 10% of battery life left, it's just going to be one more thing that adds stress to you. A few of Yoshino's competitors have solved that problem by supplying, a typical standard AC cord. I'm not sure what this standard is called, but it's the plug you'd plug in the back of a printer or a computer or a coffee maker. You probably have a dozen of these things lying around your house without really even knowing it. Yoshino does have a power brick, but what they do that's interesting, and I haven't seen any other companies do, is that they allow you to charge the device through USB-C. Now, if you're not familiar with USB-C, it's kind of this emerging standard. It's the plug that now will charge up most Android phones. It charges up the latest iPhone 15, charges most tablets, laptops, etc. This is an Apple branded charger that I think is either from my iPad or from my MacBook that uses that USB-C standard. And what I think is cool and interesting that Yoshino did is you can plug this guy right in to the USB-C power delivery port, plug this into the wall, and it's going to charge using this, what's essentially a laptop charger. Now it doesn't charge as quickly with the USB-C charger as it does with its own power brick. The power brick seems to put in around 100, 110 watts of power, while this guy will put in about 50, 60 watts of DC power. I don't know if the DC gives you any benefit in terms of speed. It does seem a little bit faster than just the pure wattage numbers would indicate. But what I think is interesting for me is that this eliminates having one more thing to find, and it actually makes for a multi-use device. So if I'm on the road and maybe I'm going to be charging my laptop or powering 3 or 4 USB-C devices, I'm probably going to bring my charger anyway, and this can now eliminate a power bank, which is a reasonably large and heavy device, and serve both to charge this guy up as well as I can even plug this guy into one of the AC ports, charge my laptop that way if I so desire. It does also have USB-C, and we'll talk about all the ports in a couple minutes, so you can eliminate this AC charger and actually get a little more efficient charging just by plugging in these cables directly. But I think that's a really interesting way to solve the problem of having yet another proprietary power brick to have to worry about. And kudos to Yoshino for doing that. I haven't seen any other companies that actually let you charge the power bank from USB-C. Now the third headline feature of this unit, and the one where there's a little bit of controversy, is the model number of this unit is the obviously somewhat awkward B660 SST. B, I assume, stands for battery bank. 660 is the amount of watt hour or energy capacity that this unit has. And the SST stands for solid state technology. And what that means is there's a bit of a different battery technology in here than you'd find in a typical power bank. Most of the other power banks either use kind of traditional lithium ion technology, or they use a slightly different lithium chemistry. You'll see this as either LFE or LiFePO, which is lithium phosphate something or other, some chemistry thing. The promise with solid state batteries is kind of two things. First of all, it has higher energy density. So what that means is for a particular weight of battery, you can get more energy in there. So theoretically that makes your battery pack a little lighter. And for a 600 watt unit, this does feel fairly light. And towards the end, we'll compare this to some other larger and smaller power banks, and I'll kind of do a little felt weight comparison and then put some stats on the screen to see if what I think these things weigh measures up to their actual weight. The other big selling point, at least in the marketing material around SST, is that it's supposedly safer. So if you've not seen videos about lithium ion batteries, exploding, I would go into YouTube after you're done with this video, of course, and after you've, mashed the like and subscribe and ring the bell for reasons I still don't understand. Go and look for videos on lithium ion thermal runaway. It's, amusing and frightening all at the same time. And solid state lithium batteries are supposed to help address that. Now, I'm not a battery chemist or, a scientist or even a Scientologist of any sort. So I, to some extent, have to take the manufacturer's claims at face value. I did spend some time Googling on solid state battery technology. It is relatively new, so there's not a ton out there, and a lot of it comes from companies that either make more traditional lithium ion batteries and tell you that don't worry about the solid state stuff, or they manufacture the solid state batteries and tell you they're the best thing since sliced bread. There are some academic papers out there, and what the consensus seems to be, and again, this is based off one or two papers, so this is a fairly emerging field of research, that yes, the energy density claims are true. You can pack more energy for a given amount of weight of these solid state batteries, which is cool. But some of the claims around safety, they're yes in some cases and no in other cases. So these seem to be less likely to experience kind of thermal runaway, and they seem to be less affected by external temperatures, which I think is what has set off a lot of those lithium ion battery fires that you can find out there on YouTube. But they have either the same or potentially less impact protection. So if this thing were to get pierced, or I don't know why this would happen, but a meteor or a bullet or something goes through one of these guys, you may have just as high a probability of this thing catching fire as a traditional lithium ion battery. And there still seems to be a bit of an undecided verdict on whether these suffer from deterioration, where, as I understand it, kind of crystals can grow in the battery cells, and that can cause a short circuit. Now, knock on wood, I've never experienced a lithium fire, despite having a whole shelf full of battery banks over there. Hopefully that never happens to me. But at least on paper, there is some additional safety around this solid state technology. And as best I can tell from the science, it does confirm that you can pack more energy into a given weight of batteries, which is nice on this 660 watt unit. Yoshino also, around the time this video comes out, should be announcing a much larger unit that looks really interesting in terms of the fact that it basically can hold the same amount of energy, or almost as much energy, as my 100-pound-ish EcoFlow bank that I've reviewed in the past, in about half that weight. So as you get into the bigger battery banks, where obviously having a lighter set of batteries is really going to impact the weight of the thing, that could really make a big difference. So with that out of the way, let's take a spin around the unit, and I'll save kind of the most exciting part, which is obviously the front panel, for the end. And let's start out in the sides. You've got some little fan vent holes there. Again, this really feels like it's aluminum, or it's a really excellent kind of faux metal plastic. And you have this handle that wraps all the way around. You have this nice grip area that I've talked about. I think it looks really nice. It feels really nice in your hand. Maybe the one negative is it's a little bit awkwardly shaped. So if you're packing this up in the back of your car, truck, van, or whatever, and you have 100 things in there that are generally sort of square shaped, you've now got this thing that's sort of a trapezoid, has this big handle, and then has these kind of Frankenstein bolt things in the sides. I was hoping there was maybe some kind of strap or something on the Yoshino website. I didn't see one. But maybe you could make a little thing in here. You could have a nice padded shoulder strap and then be able to carry this thing and sort of loop it over your shoulder. I'm not sure if that's what these are intended for, and maybe there's a strap that's forthcoming. They do feel like they're pretty solid, and again, feel like they're metal or really high-grade plastic. So maybe that's in the works from Yoshino. The back of the unit's pretty simple. You have some branding on there. You've got this little cover that covers up your ports for your solar, which is an XT60, which again is a relatively common standard, and we'll talk about the accessories that this guy comes with. And then you've got your port for your input from your power brick. I do like that they've covered up the ports. You know, I will typically complain a little bit about these port doors that open up. You know, I think most of the time when you're going to be using one of these things, you might have it on a table, much like I do. And if you're going to plug it in, you know, you're sort of going blind here. And some of the manufacturers will put a little diagram of where the ports are so you can kind of flip the thing up and, you know, realize where they are. It's not as needed in this case since there's only 2 ports, and you can pretty easily go in there and kind of feel, oh, this is the solar port, you know, this is the power brick input port. I assume they have them lift up both to keep water out of there, and you know, there's probably higher potential if something dropped on this. If it opened from, you know, in the opposite direction, it might snap off. In this case, you know, something falls and it just sort of knocks your lid down. This side looks exactly the same. You've got your fan port, your little Frankenstein bolt, you know, not too much interesting there. So let's go to the front of the unit where, you know, most of the action is on this device. So I'm generally a fan of having all your outputs and your screen on the front. You know, typically when I'm using one of these things, I'm gonna have it on a table. You know, maybe it's at a campsite, maybe I'm having a tailgate party or whatever. If I do have the unit plugged into a solar panel or into the AC for some strange reason, having that kind of out of the way in the back is nice. That way anyone in my family or, you know, anyone I'm hanging out with can pretty obviously come up to this, know where to plug their stuff in, and it all kind of makes sense. One thing I do love and I'm really excited about, and you know, if you've seen some of my other reviews, I always get a little wrapped around the axle about lights on the front. But this Yoshino has definitely won the light game. You know, Jackery was one of the first power banks I saw with a light. It was kind of on the side here. Didn't make a lot of sense, wasn't very useful. Bluetti finally moved that, you know, single light up to the front where it made a little more sense, but didn't quite illuminate the area you'd actually want to see, which would be, you know, the ports and kind of the area around there. You know, these guys have this really nice light bar, and I'll turn it on. You probably can't see it that effectively on the camera, but you know, you hit one button and it kind of wakes the unit up. I hit it again, and we've got our light on there. Now I'll turn it off so you know it doesn't affect the quality of the video, but you know, I love that it puts out a nice, useful light right around the front of this device. You know, if you had this out at a tailgate, you had this set up near where you were, you know, maybe cooking, or you had a little hot plate or something, it would provide useful light for cooking. What I'm really excited about is I'm gonna take this to a couple of 24-hour ultras that I'm running, and I'm gonna have this on my table. You know, typically I'd bring a power bank of some sort since you need to charge your headlamp at some point during the night. You might have some phones or something from your support crew that they're charging. And I typically put a little lantern next to it. Now I have this nice light. It's gonna make it super easy to find my little station. It's gonna make it super easy to see my flashlight or my phone or whatever I have sitting on the table. And it'll make it super easy for anyone else that's using the power bank to see where the plugs for their devices go. So kudos to Yoshino for a really smart and nice design feature. It looks nice, actually useful, nice diffuse light on the front of this device. In terms of the display screen, you have kind of everything you'd want on there. You have your current output wattage, so you can see how much power you're consuming across all the different ports. You have your input wattage, so if you have this guy plugged in either to USB-C or to the back or to solar or something, you see all the juice you're feeding in there. You have a runtime indicator that's in either days or hours, which is quite nice. And as a little aside, with the light on, you can see that the output is 0, so it's using a little less than a watt. Sometimes it'll bump up to a watt or so. According to the display, we've got 99 hours of time left. So if you're in some sort of situation where you just needed a reasonably decent light, you could have this guy running for days and days, presumably. For USB outputs, you have 2 standard USBs, you have 2 USB-Cs. This does feature power delivery. It says up to 100 watts on one port and 20 watts on the other. So that's gonna give you kind of full power tablet charging or phone charging out of the 20 watt port. And that's gonna charge up your power hungry MacBook Pros, your beefy Windows machines, whatever battery or drone chargers that you have that use USB-C. And I always try and mention, if you do have a USB-C powered device, ideally you'd wanna plug it directly into that port versus plugging in your AC adapter. Because that AC adapter is going to have a 10 or 20% overage in terms of turning the energy that's in the battery that's sort of stored as DC into AC to go into these outlets, and then your little power brick is basically turning that back into DC. So that's where you lose that 20% or so. Now I realize you only have 2 USB-C ports, so if you and 3 of your buddies want to charge your laptop, somebody's got to use a power brick, but to the extent you can use those USB-C ports first and foremost, that's a good idea. AC wise, you have 3 ports on here. They're all grounded, so you can use your 3-prong plug. They also have the 20 amp little notch on the side, although I don't think this could actually supply 20 amps. I think the output's rated around 600 to 800 watts, so you're not gonna see 20 amps from these things. So it's kind of odd they put this little notch in here, which is a 20 amp plug that you could use for a floor cleaner or a grinder or something like that. On the DC side, they also did something interesting. Instead of supplying the typical, one automotive style cigarette lighter 12 volt output, they supply two of these 5521 DC ports. And I'm seeing more and more power banks do that. And initially I was, a little bit skeptical. I wasn't sure what that port was or, why you would want one. And I'm starting to become more and more of a fan. And the reason for that is you can get things like this. This is a 5521 on one end, and it's got a, I don't know what this connector is called, but it's the connector that my IceCo 12 volt cooler uses. And this is obviously a more compact cable than one that has the big cigarette lighter thing hanging on the end. And for whatever reason, the cable I got with my cooler, the connector is not very good. Those automotive style connectors, you're plugging this big plastic thing into, a metal hole of some sort. Some of them are, I guess, made either a little bigger or smaller. That one's particularly floppy. And there have been several incidents where, somebody's jostled that just a little bit and the things come out. With this connector, with this 5521, I plug it in there, I get a good solid connection. It's a lot more compact. And instead of only having one 12 volt output, I get two on here, which is kind of nice. I'm in the process of building out a little cable so I can charge my radios that again has this 5521 on one end. And then I just need to get the goofy little proprietary connector that goes into my radio on the other end. And then I can charge these and do it a little more efficiently than plugging a brick into the AC outlet, and also do it a little more securely than having one of those automotive style adapters. Now, if you're saying, hey, I've already got a bunch of automotive style stuff, that's kind of a bummer that now I have to get new cables. We'll talk about that in a minute, but don't worry, you don't actually have to get new cables. The final thing I'll say about this front panel, all the outputs are individually switched. So if you're just using the USB, you can turn that on. If you want to use everything, you can turn that on individually as well. It does seem to be pretty smart about when it uses the inverter. You can see right now it claims it's drawing 0 watts, even though I have the inverter on. When you plug something in, that'll spin up and start to consume some juice, just turning that battery energy into AC. So I mentioned not being too worried if you already have automotive style stuff and you're a little concerned about having to buy new cables, because Yoshino does give you a pretty nice set of accessories. They have these nice boxes. I think everything kind of fit within this design-oriented theme of the device itself. The packaging was nice, the manuals are nice. You got these little boxes that are pretty nice. And they give you a car charging cable, so you can plug into the back of the unit, plug that 12 volt thing into your car somewhere and be able to charge the device that way. I think that's particularly nice if, say you're on a long road trip and you maybe have a cooler in the back or something. You plug this plug from your car into the power bank, and then you plug the cooler into the power bank. And this guy kind of serves as like a backup power source of sorts. So, if you take a stop and you're filling up with gas or going into a rest station and your vehicle is no longer powered, your power bank is now powering the cooler. And like most power banks, this does support pass-through. What that means is I can have this device plugged into solar to my vehicle through that 12 volt, to the wall, whatever I'm using, and have a bunch of devices powered into the front, and it's going to be able to simultaneously charge as well as pump out power. In addition to that, you also get a solar adapter that goes from that XT60 connection, which is this little yellow guy in the back, into a standard MC4 style connector. That's the connector that you'll typically find on solar panels, or even if you have something like a Jackery where it's got that weird barrel connector, you can get adapters to MC4. So it's kind of the, gets you to the standard that everyone uses for solar, which is quite nice. And then finally, you have the solution to that problem of, hey, I already have a bunch of automotive style 12 volt stuff. What am I going to do with this 5521 plug? In that they give you a 5521 to car adapter cable. So that's pretty nice. They do sell additional ones on your website. So if you had maybe a cooler and wanted to charge up some sort of CB or some other two-way radio that had a 12 volt automotive style adapter, you get two of those puppies, plug them in here, and be able to power two DC devices simultaneously, which is quite nice. Now, in terms of doing a little comparison, I'm not going to go feature by feature. I do have reviews on these two units that I'll link to down below if you want to check those out. But this is more around that SST promise that it's going to provide more power in a smaller and lighter package. So this is a Blue Eddy, I think just shy of 300 watt hour battery bank. our Yoshino obviously has about 660 watt hours. And then we've got this EcoFlow that I think is around 1090 or just shy of 1100 watt hours. So this guy I would say feels, I don't know, like 10, 12 pounds, versus the Bluetti in terms of size. If you look at these, this is essentially half the pack in terms of capacity, actually a little bit less than half because this guy's just shy of 300 watt hours. And this is obviously over 600 watt hours. So this is like, 60% more battery. And I think it's, judging by my eyes, maybe 30% larger. So you're getting more than double the capacity at a 30% size penalty. In terms of weight, that guy's probably 10. Maybe this guy's 12, 15. So 50% increase in size, 100% increase, essentially more than double the capacity, and maybe a 40% increase in size. So that seems to speak pretty highly in terms of the benefits for that SST technology. So if we go up a little more, I'm going to probably around 1100 watt hours with this EcoFlow. This is a great unit. All three of these are probably my favorite units in their particular size, but that guy's gotta be, he's not double. This probably weighs 30% more, so I'd say this is maybe 18, 19 pounds. Size-wise, probably about 40, 50% more, probably about 40% more volume, we'll call it. So, we're getting maybe 40% more capacity, definitely a little more weight, definitely a little more size, but a little less dramatic a difference between this Yoshino and the EcoFlow in terms of size. Now, I do think the EcoFlow maybe used its larger size a little more efficiently. I guess you could argue it cheats a little bit by having its handles kind of flying off on the side versus the Yoshino. This handle kind of takes a bit of volume. If you had that guy chopped off, this would look a lot more smaller in comparison versus having this, kind of big chunky handle, which again is very nice to carry and a nice feature. But in terms of volume, if I was packing these two guys in my vehicle, it does take up a little bit of packing space having this guy up there. So who would I recommend this unit for at the end of the day? I think this is a nicely designed power bank. I do think that promise of SST, at least in terms of packing a good amount of power, this is almost 700 watt hours in a pretty compact package, not much bigger than that 300 watt hour Bluetti that I just had on the table. That kind of dictates who I think might want to buy this. If you don't quite need a 1000 watt hour battery, if that's a little too much in terms of price, in terms of size, I haven't really seen anything that's got as nice a design as this unit. This is something you could keep on a shelf in your office and it wouldn't look too out of place. This guy is something that doesn't quite look as much like a big hunk of technology with a giant battery inside. The safety stuff, to some extent remains to be seen. I'm kind of interested in seeing where that technology goes and seeing as more testing and some more real world stuff gets out there. I obviously don't have the ability or desire to go and throw a bunch of power banks on an open flame and see which ones do better than others. But hopefully someone with a laboratory and the proper gear will start to do some testing and see how those SST claims hold up. The Yoshino does have an app available. I wasn't able to get it to connect to the unit. I had a whole bunch of problems logging in, which I eventually figured out is because it's trying to do some goofy stuff with sending my data off. My network in here is pretty locked down and I try and stop anything from hoovering up my data and sending it to places where I don't want it to go. Once I connected to the mobile network where I don't have those restrictions, I was finally able to log in. But after 20 minutes of diligent effort, I couldn't get this guy to actually connect. I could get my app to talk to the Bluetooth radio inside this device, but I could never get it to connect to the wireless network. At least the way the app is configured, you can't really do anything unless you're able to connect it to the wireless connection. So I can't comment on how good or how bad the app is. The reason I do mention the app and wanted to get in there and test it out is some of the power banks, and I'm thinking of EcoFlow in particular, will have a bunch of extra settings that you can only access in the app. And those settings can be interesting and wonderful, or they can be potentially problematic. And where they can be potentially problematic is with the EcoFlow that I showed you earlier. At least when I got the device, the default setting was that it would turn off all its outputs after, I think it was like 4 hours. So when I was in camp and I had my 12-volt cooler set up and we were having a nice weekend family camp out, I woke up in the morning and my cooler was turned off. And I got really worried. I was worried I blew fuses or the thing broke or whatnot. Powered up my power bank and everything was fine. So sort of chalked it up to random occurrence. We went and played in the lake and did a whole bunch of stuff, came back, it was off again. And I finally figured out that if you go into the app, there's a setting where you can disable those automatic power offs. So I'm a little bit curious and concerned about that. I wasn't able to get in here and test if this has anything similar. So I'm not sure if there's, settings where it's going to turn off outputs after, some period of inactivity. The other thing I'll say is, Yoshino isn't a company I had heard of until they reached out and asked if I wanted to take a look at one of these units. But they are, as far as I'm aware, one of the first big brands that's obviously put some attention and some focus into how they've designed their units that's using this solid state technology. I think that could be a real boon for some of the larger battery banks. And I'm interested to see how that large one that they're releasing does. I think it's 2,000-ish watt hours, so it's right up there with the big guys. It's something you could use to back up your refrigerator, back up some key components of your house, put a little bit of a charge in an EV in a pinch. So that is where having that power to weight advantage could really come in handy. So hopefully you're all amped up after having seen this high voltage review of the Yoshino B660 SST. As always, appreciate your comments down below if you've used this or similar units. Hit the subscribe button if you want more of this low-grade nonsense. Click on the bell. I don't know what the hell it does, but every person on YouTube tells you to hit it, so I'm a follower, not a leader. Go for that action, and hope that you stay charged, you don't meet a lot of resistance in life, and that you electrify the crowd wherever your journey takes you. Big Heavy, saying peace. Ever wonder why every talking head on YouTube asks you to hit the like and subscribe button at the end of their video? You were right, because we're living in a computer simulation. And our benevolent robotic overlords get just a little bit of energy every time you hit that like. So do me, the rest of civilization, and our benevolent robotic overlords a favor. Mash that subscribe, be kind to each other, keep living your simulated dreams.